Hello, welcome to the Thinkers50 Radar 2023 series, brought to you in partnership with Deloitte. I'm Des Dearlove, co-founder of Thinkers50. For more than 20 years, we've been identifying, ranking and sharing extraordinary business and management ideas. As we face up to global challenges, everything from climate change to pandemics and geopolitical disruptions, fresh thinking is needed more now than ever. We want to make the leading ideas more accessible, more diverse, and more impactful globally. Every January, Thinkers50 announces 30 management and business thinkers to watch in the coming year. It's a diverse mix of people who have been nominated by the Thinkers50 community and whose work has attracted our attention. These are the new and exciting voices in management. The result for 2023 is an eclectic group of people who we believe will make an impact with their ideas, their campaigning, their research, and their passion in the coming 12 months. More than that, by showcasing their ideas, we hope they will be inspired to carry the torch for management thinking in the years ahead. Now, they don't have all the answers, but they are asking important questions we need to address as individuals, organizations, and societies. And talking of questions, we want to hear yours. So please let us know where you are joining from today and send over your thoughts and questions anytime during the session. Today, we're delighted to be joined by one of these new voices of management thinking, Melissa Swift. Melissa is the author of Work Here Now, Think Like a Human and Build a Powerhouse Workplace, which is published by Wiley. Melissa is the North American transformation leader at Mercer, where she helps clients bring their workforces to a different and better future. Her work leverages data analytics and a humanist view of the workplace to create extraordinary outcomes. She's been named a top influencer on the future of work by Analytica. Melissa, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, that's great. Hey, listen, before we talk about your work, which obviously we're going to do, what was it like to find yourself on the Thinkers50 radar list?
Well, I will confess, I had a bit of the Sally Field reaction. You know, you like me, you really like me, right? No, it was in all seriousness, it was a genuinely heartwarming moment because, you know, you do all this work and you do it for years and in different ways. And kind of like, does anybody notice, right? So it's nice when someone notices, and it's amazing to be part of, you know, I looked at who else, right? And I'm going, this is the ecosystem I want to be a part of, right? These are the people really kind of pushing the world's thinking on these topics. So I was excited, and not having to, you know, another celebrity reference, have the Groucho marks, you know, should I want to be in a club that would have me as a member?
Well, we're delighted to have you in the Radar Club anyway, and we're, you know, delighted that you could join us today. Work. Well, in one form or another, we all experience it. We've all, you know, we all have to get to grips with it. And I think, I mean, if we can sort of kick this off, I think we all recognize that the pandemic in particular has had an impact on how we work. But I mean, how profound do you think that is, and how lasting will its effects be?
So I think the interesting thing about the pandemic is that it was just kind of a tipping point, or a straw that broke the camel's back moment for what academic research has been documenting as sort of decades of work getting worse in different ways. If you look at a phenomenon like intensified work, right? And that's where you have to do more units of work per unit of time. So that could be too many Zoom meetings in a day. That could be picking too many strawberries in an hour, right? Every job's got a version of it. Intensified work been getting worse for decades. You look at greedy work, where work starts spilling out of the boundaries, right? And suddenly you're on your phone during breakfast and you're taking calls during dinner and in the weekends and all that. Greedy work also has been getting worse for decades. And what's worse, we've started to pay people a premium for it. We now pay a premium for overwork, which we didn't do 50 years ago. So what's interesting is you'd have this quiet kind of creep. And I sense it, you know, Gen X, right? I sense it during my lifetime. Work seems to have gotten worse. And the thing is, it has. And the pandemic was just kind of that tipping point moment that alerted us to what was actually sort of decades worth of debris that had built up.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, it suddenly kind of it's made it kind of real, and possibly gave us an opportunity to rework work, I suppose. But we hear a lot about the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and all these. Are they new phenomena? I mean, I guess it's the same question, but in a slightly different framing. But are they really new phenomena or just new labels?
I think we did actually see increased labor market churn. And I think there's some structural reasons for that, right? That, for instance, with more virtual work, if you think about it, it used to be, okay, I have these 3 employers, they're in the small town where I live. Well, suddenly, if I have 30 employers that I can work for virtually, right, just my literally my ability to move to has to we do that. But again, what some of our own data, some of our Mercer research shows, is that some of the Great Resignation trends, again, were just exacerbations of things like, for instance, retention rates for African American talent in the United States have always been much worse than for other groups, because that group has a worse experience in the workplace, right? That employee experience is not consistent across ethnic groups. And then in our research, that group was more likely to resign during the Great Resignation. And now, a year later, when we've declared the Great Resignation over, sometimes they're even more likely to resign. And so it's worth kind of thinking about, again, we did have some immediate labor market effects, but to what extent are we just dealing with kind of the decades and centuries of sort of bad heritage of things at work?
Yeah. I mean, we're going to, in a minute, we're going to talk about, I mean, you sort of hinted at it or alluded to it, the fact that work has been steadily becoming more and more broken in a certain way of thinking, and we can talk about that. But the kind of the switch to hybrid, we were all working remotely. I mean, I know you're there in Mercer's very impressive office of the future. But a lot of people, I mean, that journey back into work has been a difficult one. I mean, and obviously you've got employers on both sides, people saying, I mean, and what I find quite difficult is, and slightly bizarre, is that quite a lot of the technology companies are saying, you must work in the office, you must come in. Not all. I know at Dell that they've been very accepting of the fact that people can work from home and work remotely, but by and large, a lot of the technology companies, which doesn't seem to make sense, want the people to come in. But that's been hard for some people. I mean, that's been a difficult journey back to the office.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, I think there's 2 different things going on here. Number one, we're having a conversation about where, when oftentimes we should be having a conversation about when. That when people say, I want flexibility to work from home, what they actually don't want is location flexibility sometimes so much as time flexibility. So if you think about it, I'm here in the Mercer office today. It would be really weird and countercultural for me to come in at noon and stay until 9, right? People would think I was weird on both ends of that. But that might be my right working period, right? So sometimes that's what people want. And we see this actually in shift work, that organizations have had great success just slightly shifting shifts off of things like kids drop off or pickup times from school, right? Just those little accommodations, and people aren't working fewer hours, and they're not doing manufacturing work from home because that's not possible. But that little when shift, I think, is very helpful. So that's a piece of it. But I also think there's this piece, I talk about it in the book, the work anxiety monster.
Yeah.
That what some organizations are going through is this anxiety about, if I'm not watching people work, are they working? We've heard that dialogue very, very openly. And my guidance is just calm that voice and reconnect work to outcomes. If organizations can do that piece, a lot of these problems solve themselves, because then you're not looking at, do I see X number of people here, here, and here? You're saying, did I get accomplished what I wanted to get accomplished, which is the actual goal, right? Not the activity, the outcomes.
Yeah. No, the outputs, absolutely. I mean, another interesting, obviously your book, the title of your book kind of alludes to this. I think it's not unfair to try to find the silver linings in the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of people have suffered greatly, and we're not sort of undermining that in any way. But there's been a kind of a humanizing of work. We found ourselves going into people's homes and seeing them interact with their children and with their, not always not always great to mix those two things during the working day, but it's happened, and I
Ricky.
think we're much more accepting of that. We've seen, the pets. We've all seen the videos, but to some extent, that seems to me it must be a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the core kind of theses of the book is that we've had this artificial dividing line of, this is work and we do things this way over here, and this is sort of human life and we do things this way over here. Oh, why? It seems like it would all just kind of go better if we kind of said this is how humans function best, and let's incorporate that into our ways of working. And I think that is a positive outcome of the pandemic, this sort of view of us as humans contextualized to our lives. And it's a positive development about we're kind of negotiating a new lifestyle contract, right? Where my job has to fit into my whole life, right? And I have to also make that all work together. It's not an either or.
But I guess the other side of that is that now there's an expectation, there's a demand for that, and employers have got to adjust as well. I mean, it's a bit like, we talk about the genie being out of the bottle. The worker is out of their little cubicle and doesn't necessarily want to go back into it, or will not be put back into it. But that creates new responsibilities and new pressures on the employer as well.
Absolutely. And you hear this kind of constant dialogue about, well, the second things tighten up economically, that's all going to change, right? The employer's going to get the power back. And respectfully, I don't believe that. Partly because, again, I mean, US data, we're still short 4 million workers. When you look at, available workers versus job listings, right, we're still short 4 million people. So I don't see this massive power shift happening anytime soon. I think, to your point, it's a secular shift, not a cyclical one. And, we have to readjust. And honestly, these readjustment periods have been good for business. If you look at the last time we readjusted, which would kind of be beginning through the middle of the 20th century, where we started to have, worker safety protections and all that good stuff, the result was terrific productivity by the middle of the 20th century, because guess what? It's better for workers and employers alike if it's not dangerous to come to work. And I think we're going through another period like that right now. And it's going to have a positive economic effect in addition to all the good that it sort of does for humanity.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the sort of the business cycle. I mean, before we went live, you and I were talking about the tech companies, and we're seeing, it does feel a little bit like the same old, same old. We're seeing massive layoffs, and I wondered from your point of view, from where you're standing, is this? I mean, the two things we're hearing is, one, good old automation and artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these things. Is that what's driving the tech companies to shed staff, or is it simply that they over recruited, in the good times? Because a lot of them had a good, if I may say so, a good pandemic for obvious reasons. But is it simply that they took on too many people?
Yeah, it's tricky. We often don't have intentional workforces, right? That, we sort of, to your point, in the good times, we get excited. We hire a lot of people. It's very well intended, right? It's, we have this capacity and capability to do more, so let's do more. And then again, we're not intentional about, this is the work that actually needs to be done. And the work that actually needed to be done maybe didn't change as much as our workforce size did. And then you get these natural moments of pruning back. I don't think we're starting to really see the impacts of automation yet. I'm kind of seeing two camps among, our clients, right? One camp, okay, we're doing a bunch of work with ChatGPT. We're quietly using it for, first drafts. It's a great first draft generator. I wouldn't use it for the final draft. And then we're seeing another camp saying, well, our data, our information is far too sensitive to upload in that way, right? So it's banned. It's cut. Don't touch it. Can't access the website. You're done. And I think as long as we're seeing that much variation, the impacts are going to be mixed for now.
Yeah. Okay. In the book, you really, chapter 1, you sort of kick off talking about, understanding and fixing broken work. And what ways, I mean, I know we've kind of alluded to, we've jumped around a little bit, but in what ways do you think that the work is broken or no longer sort of fit for purpose? What are some of the areas that you're alluding to there?
So I kind of look at 3 areas. So one, intensified work we've talked about already. And again, that's the just like too much work squeezed into too little time. For folks who've watched the TV show The Wire, when they keep talking about doing more with less, right? That's intensified work. So that's one, and it's a big one. And it's probably the one we feel the most viscerally and palpably. But then there's two other kinds. So another kind would be misunderstood work. And that's where, and again, we've all been there, your boss doesn't understand the work you do. And it sounds kind of like funny and cute and Michael Scott from The Office, but in my book, I talk about, I think it's one of the causes of the global financial crisis of '08. I have these very vivid memories of, I was living in London and working for a bank at the time. And, we'd go to bars and clubs, and all of these traders were bragging about, my boss has no idea the trades I put on, right? Flash forward a year, right? And the global economy has tanked because of those very trades. So misunderstood work, sounds kind of funny and goofy, but it's actually quite dangerous. And it's also frustrating from a DEI perspective, because if your boss doesn't understand the work that's being done, they generally don't pick the right people to do it, right? And they tend to pick people from dominant groups and blah, blah, blah. And it just plays out in kind of unpleasant ways. So, that's sort of another kind of broken work. So, when you think about it, there's sort of different dynamics in how you handle these types of broken work. But the key is to really just understand what the work itself is. That's at the root of both, because then you sort of do the right amount of it, you understand it, and you also get rid of the third category, which is performative work. And performative work is really interesting because we're always talking about performance in the workplace context, performance management. But we generally mean performance like athletic performance. But what's actually going on is theatrical performance, right? I'm sending an email to show that I'm sending an email. I'm replying all. I'm setting up meetings. Look at me doing all the things. And again, it sounds funny and goofy, but it wastes everyone's time. It contributes to intensified work. It contributes to greedy work, right? You're creating work that's spilling over the boundaries of the day because you're doing stuff for show. It's not real. And it also has, a negative DEI piece to it, because the people who are best at performing work are generally the folks from the best represented groups in the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of modern equivalent of what we used to call presenteeism. Leaving your jacket over the back of the chair so that people thought, oh, he's still at his desk, even though he's gone home long since. But as you say, a kind of performance, a kind of a little bit of theater.
Absolutely. It's there's a great Seinfeld episode where George leaves his car at the office. Right? it's a version of that.
Yeah. The same sort of stuff. Okay, right. The other thing that I found really useful and helpful about the book is this notion that in order to move into the future, we have to switch off the past. We have to do things differently. We have to, and I think that's a truism across the piece. That in order to pick up something new, you sometimes have to put something down because our hands are already full. How do you manage that, and how do you help clients do that sort of thing? Because that's clearly a necessity.
Yes. So you were asking about how do you manage that balance of picking new things up and putting things down?
How do you get rid of, stop the past in order to move into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was the outgrowth of, for years, I'd been sort of irritated by the term future of work. And so I did some sort of like mental interrogation of, why is that term annoying me? It's so banal, right? Why does this get on my nerves? And what I realized was that we kind of never get there. And we don't necessarily seem to get closer to the future of work. And so that's when I got really interested in, okay, well, what's perpetuating the past? And it turns out there's a bunch of structural factors. Number one, we don't generally think about sort of the work enough, that oftentimes our thinking about work is very focused on our thinking about pay. And there's the two sides of the equation, right? There's what you ask me to do and what you pay me for it. We get very focused on kind of this side. So there's that piece. There's also the fact that, coming back to the pay question, we tend to reward leaders for sameness, not for difference, right? So, continuity, keep the business stable, even results, particularly in public companies, but everywhere. And so that doesn't provide a major incentive to move to the future of work, because the past is the steady Eddie, There's also a challenge in HR organizations, which are supposed to be the stewards of the future of work, are generally underfunded, right? So they're at about a third the staffing level, proportionate to number of employees per company, of IT or of finance, right? So if you feel intuitively like HR is understaffed, HR is numerically understaffed. And you've got these very complex organizations and relatively simple HR departments. And complexity theory teaches us that if you're not at the same level of complexity as the outside environment, right, you're screwed, you're in trouble. And so that really doesn't help either. So we've got all these kind of factors coming together. And then there's the talent acquisition one too, where because of the scale needed for talent acquisition at many companies, we literally copy paste, right? So if you're going to hire somebody for a job, you say, okay, well, which rec am I going to clone, right? Oh my God, you just said clone. No, don't do the right. If you're hiring clones, there's a problem. There's a serious problem. So all of those kind of structural factors together, they don't set us up for success, right? We are just not equipped to actually implement a future of work with all of the mechanisms and the incentives running in the wrong direction. And I think a vivid illustration of this is, I mean, look, we're reopening the conversation on child labor in the United States. Talk about the past of work that should not come back, but it keeps rearing its ugly head.
I mean, the cloning piece that you just mentioned. I mean, that it seems that would play in really well with the whole DEI kind of conversation that's going on, and clearly I mean, Thinkers50 is like a fundamental principle. We want diversity of ideas and thoughts because it enriches everything for everyone. So I've never really understood why organizations seem, let's just say, somewhat resistant to it. It's good for them. It's better. It's good for business.
Absolutely. But it's not expedient, right? It's easier to clone the rec than to write a whole new job that you need a whole new person for. And again, all the incentives are not to upset the apple cart. So when you bring in diversity of thought, we've all seen the great data about the diverse team is higher performing, but it takes them a little while. And many organizations are not willing to live through that little dip that actually gets you to the higher performance. I think that's a bit of the phenomenon you're experiencing.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think one of the issues is it's harder to manage. I was talking to Francesca Gino at Harvard recently, and her research at the moment is very much looking at the power of difference. But one of the things that you find is that managing a diverse team, getting them to work together, can be more challenging. However, the payoff, if you like, the potential upside is huge. But it's more of a challenge and perhaps managers and leaders, don't want to take up that challenge. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because we sort of can't blame leaders in a way. They've come up through a system that doesn't incentivize them to do so. So, I talk about this in the book, that early in career, right, we want people to become high experts. And that moment, I think, is really kind of the crucible of a lot of bad leadership behaviors or leadership skill gaps later on. That, again, delivering sort of predictable high expert results in, let's say, the first 10 years of your career, the thing that most companies want from their early in career talent, it doesn't shape you into the kind of person who says, I want to sit down with a diverse group and I want them to battle it out and I want to really come to the ideas that are striking and provocative, because your formative years were spent on kind of like sameness and linear build. I think we don't give enough credit to how people are shaped in kind of their business childhoods.
Yeah, no, I completely. And I always, I used to write a careers column for the London Times. And the thing that used to frustrate me then, and it still frustrates me, is that the shape of careers, we've been told that there's a certain shape to it, and that you kind of do your sort of apprenticeship in your 20s and then you get on in your 30s. And of course, that is a man-shaped career structure. It's not a naturally occurring thing. It's something that's been imposed. And then, so what we're doing is we're making it more difficult for women to reach senior management, because the very years when they might want to be either working and having children or just at home having children, they're actually penalized, but not because of any natural reason other than men designed the career structure, it seems to me.
Absolutely. And greedy work just compounds that, right? As long as you pay people more and promote them more to work, 60 plus, 70 plus hours a week, which quantitatively in organizations we do, right? This isn't sort of like my contention. This has been quantitatively proven. You're going to exclude caregivers, right, from the workforce. And that could be women, that could be, let's say, foreign-born workers with family networks they're supporting, right? It's kind of like all the people you're trying to bring into the tent. That's not happening.
Yeah, no, quite. So human-centric, that's what we want. We want to be more human-centric. You're an advocate of that. The book is very much in that thing. How can we make more human-centric decisions? What are we talking about here? And how can we, dare I say it, re-educate the leaders?
Well, some of it is just kind of, it's going to sound silly, but just thinking about people as people, right? People need to eat. People need access to a bathroom. People need to sleep. And that sounds so silly, but you're like, Melissa, why are you saying these things? Well, in many workplaces, those things don't happen, right? We don't give people food breaks. We have to regulate that there's a bathroom because workplaces weren't offering them. We have the sleep issue is a really interesting one because that actually hits quite senior executives. So if you're in a very senior role, you're working globally, right? You're getting those greedy work. I'm in a meeting at 6 a.m. with China, right? And then I'm on the phone, very late with the West Coast or, whatever it is. And so a lot of our very senior leaders up to CEO level are on no sleep. And scientific data shows that is the same as coming to work inebriated. So we wouldn't want all those leaders to come to work drunk, but we are perfectly happy for them to come in having not slept. So number one, just, think about people as people with human needs. And I'm seeing a question about nap booths. I'm in favor. People have a really diverse array of circadian rhythms. And so that if you want people to generally work together during the 9-to-5 workday, you may have to accommodate some people who need, a 20-minute nap in the middle of the day, which, by the way, in some cultures is standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
Right? These things are very culturally determined as well. And then I think another piece of human-centric decision-making is actually being a bit skeptical or pessimistic and planning better for technology and processes to fail. And that sounds really dark, but I think it's actually a positive for human workers that if you plan for technology to fail and you have a fallback plan, then, like Bob from accounting doesn't become the fallback plan. As humans, our resourcefulness is wonderful, right? And this is something we haven't really gotten technology to do yet, is that resourceful, like I'm going to MacGyver it, I'm going to put it together with gum and paper clips and I'm going to make it happen. But the reality is that also burns a lot of human energy. So if you have sort of better plan Bs and plan Cs, understanding that technology fails. I just had a technology failure earlier in this broadcast, right? Process. These things happen and it's okay. And you just need a plan. It takes, I think that really takes some of the kind of the strain off your human workers.
Yeah, no, I am, and I honestly shocked to hear when I hear stories, and I still hear them. I mean, people used to tell me stories, I say, when I used to write about careers and jobs, but I still hear stories about people who, if the mouse doesn't move for more than a few minutes, their supervisor is aware of the fact that they're not at their desk, or that the people have to actually kind of explain that they're taking a bathroom break or be timed. I mean, this is horrendous in 2023. It's ridiculous.
It's bananas. And I think what organizations don't understand is, like, even if let's say you're a corporation with zero empathy, let's say you don't care about your human workers at all. What you're still not taking into account is when you do all that stuff, it creates this mental load for your workers, right? If I have to worry about such basic things, right? There's a mental load and that impedes productivity. So the economic results that you think you're driving by kind of driving people harder and harder, you're getting the opposite impact. So again, you don't have to care, but you do need to think about the business impact.
I can't think of anything that would annoy me more or disengage me from work than some of these silly little things. I mean, it's the exact, I mean, human nature says it's the exact, in fact, it would make you want to sabotage the company, to be quite honest. If you treated that poorly, I think you would go out of your way to catch them out or to circumvent the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, we rely on technology to be good at managing humans. So, for instance, I talk about in the book that we have all these algorithms that now tell delivery drivers, right, how fast they're supposed to deliver stuff, right? And so now in New York, it is really hard not to get run over by a delivery guy on a bike. And it's not that delivery guy's fault, right? An algorithm told him it needs to be there in 10 minutes, even though it actually takes 15 minutes to bike from, point A to point B. And so it's fascinating that we've put so much emphasis on technology's ability to manage folks when it's, humans struggle to manage humans. Why would we think tech would, be good at it? And B, it's going to cut corners in ways that you don't like and that are counterproductive for, to your point, the worker or, for broader society.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening too that back in the early part of the 20th century when we had stopwatch management, Taylorism, Henry Ford standing, timing how long it took, or Frederick Taylor timing how long it took for a man to dig a ditch, and then saying that's what you've got to be able to repeat that. It sounds as though the algorithms are just the modern incarnation of the same misguided idea.
Yeah, we're right back there. And some of the worst ideas don't even come from the Industrial Revolution. They come from slavery. That we started getting really interested in individual human output as opposed to collective outcomes when we started thinking about owning people. And a lot of modern performance management kind of comes from some really kind of dark and gnarly roots that it's worth re-examining. What are we, again, we're reproducing the past in some pretty crummy ways.
Yeah. No, it's worth saying here, while we were talking about technology problems, that we're having our own little technology problem in terms of getting your questions to us. But I have got, some of them are coming through now, so apologies for that. But we've got a great comment here. Someone says, people who are micromanaged come up with very creative ways to pretend they work and spend more time faking it than it actually takes to do the work. And that's so true. It's so true, I think. So that's a really helpful comment.
It creates performative work, the exact thing you don't want.
Yeah, no, quite. And it's just remarkable to me that we still haven't learned that lesson, and people still think that you're going to get more out of people by treating them like that. What about, another thing you touch on in the book is sort of couples and counseling and the sort of help that because obviously a lot of now we have a lot of both partners will be working, and how they manage that together.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting, to your point kind of about careers being architected for men, right? Yeah. I would say that they're also architected often for men with non-working spouses. So if you look at dual career families, right? Nothing in the workplace is set up for you, right? And it's not just the workplace. It's, the PTA meeting that happens at 2:30 in the afternoon, right? Right in the middle of your work. Who's going to go? Who are you going to send to that? And I think it's a very interesting dynamic to think about if families are configured differently, if gender roles are different. Work has been so slow to change around those things.
Well, I mean, is it? I want this session to be practical as well. So, don't hold back on practical advice for people, because a lot of people will be listening to this and thinking, oh yeah, tearing their hair out probably, and thinking, how can I change my workplace for the better? How can I overcome some of these issues? Because I think there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of intentionality among people, held back by either these outmoded and outdated architectures and structures, and simply people don't know how to get to the next place, to a better place.
Well, I think step one is always open up the conversation. And when I say that, I mean at organizational level or at team level, and be willing to have that. I think sometimes there's this assumption of kind of like, well, the work is what it is, right? The work's not going to change. Well, the work is just how we get to the business outcome we want, right? And we can renegotiate all of that how, and that how can get better. But you have to have the conversation, and you have to be willing to engage with. And this is something that can be scary for organizations and can be scary for leaders within their own teams. You have to engage with what is people's everyday experience of work. And you have to listen to some of that feedback about, well, just this part's never felt right? That meeting always seems like a waste, right? That feedback that organizations have been so impervious to, again, don't think of it as whiny employees. Think of it as productivity suggestions, because that's what you're actually getting. All those places where work doesn't feel quite right for workers are generally not productive places either, but we don't see it that way. And you have to open up a real two-way dialogue, not, we did some employee listening and then we sent out a broadcast message, right? It's got to be an actual engaged dialogue. But I think once you, and we see some encouraging examples of this, at Google, they reached out to all employees and they said, we want to get more efficient. Tell us how. I think that kind of move is amazing. But it really starts with that conversation about the everyday experience of work. And then you have to actually listen to where people think it's going wrong. That's the touchstone, and that's the starting point.
Yeah. We did a Thinkers50 event at MIT last week, which we were delighted to be invited there with the initiative on the digital economy. And one of the sessions was looking at hybrid work, and I was struck by that we invited somebody from Dell, a guy called Jerry Carter, and he very thoughtful, very reflective leader. One of the things he was saying is one of the things that impedes people in his team is the necessity to attend pointless meetings where there's a cast of thousands or a cast of many people in the meeting. And he said, I've told my people that if there's no reason for them to be there, they can just refuse the meeting, even if it's being called by somebody more senior. And if they have a problem with that, he said, just refer them to me. But that protective, that willingness to, absolutely, stick your head above the parapet and say, actually, we are wasting people's time, and all it's doing is again, disengaging, if that's the right word. But people won't engage with that. But to have a leader who's actually thought about it and said, no, I'm going to change this. I'm not going to, because unfortunately, we are still, guilty of hierarchy to the extent that it's very hard if your boss says, I want you to come to this meeting, even if you know it's a waste of time. It's very hard to refuse that.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm very encouraged. One of the concrete strategies in the book is kill off standing meetings whenever you can. And I've been really encouraged seeing a few companies that took every single standing meeting off the calendar and then just put back on the ones that people desperately needed. And it was something like 80% of the meetings never came back because to your point, they don't really serve a purpose. They're performative work. So one great piece of low-hanging fruit often is those standing meetings, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's good. We got a question coming in. Interesting. You're talking about 80%. What do you think about 4-day work week versus a 5-day work week? Is this the future?
I think it could be. Look, if you look at the most extreme version, the so-called, results only work environment, right, where you're only looking at outcomes, then you don't care how many days people work, right? That it is about the worker as a fully empowered adult, connect however you want. And I think the trend toward more asynchronous work is actually very helpful here. If you and I are working in a shared document and, we don't need to be in meetings all the time, again, does that require a full 5-day calendar? We're not scheduling all those meetings. Maybe we can get it done in 3. I think in general, it's a positive development, partly because it pulls out more of that mental overhang that I think impacts productivity more than we think, of that worry about, very concretely, oh God, every weekend I feel this. I've got all this stuff to get done and only 2 days to do it in, right? That pull a little bit of that anxiety out. And I think you'd have more productive people during the 4 days you do have them.
Yeah. No, it's again, to your point earlier, is like we're having a conversation about a 4-day week, but actually one of the unfortunate, and as you rightly say, it's been coming for a while. It wasn't caused by the pandemic. It was just exacerbated or compounded. Is we actually suddenly moved to a 7-day week.
Yeah,
that's what happened.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, always on, and people felt that because they were at home and they were working at home, that they had to answer emails immediately, and regardless of what day of the week it was.
Yeah, and I think that responsiveness expectation is another great lever to hit. If you can change norms about, am I expected to respond to every email I receive, and how quickly am I expected to respond? That is, I worked with one organization where they found that email was the primary stressor of their people, right? So just change a few norms around email, that can have an immediate cultural impact.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of it's role modeling. It's what the leader does. If the leader always replies instantly, and then people are gonna do this, or feel that they have to do the same. Got another question here. But how does one make the leader actually listen or change a culture if it's bottom up? Question mark. Of course, culture ought to change top down, but that's rarely where the need for change is felt first. And I think that's true. The people who know what the problems are often aren't the ones in charge.
Yeah. Well, I think, number one, create a mechanism to listen to those people. Number two, change the incentives for leaders. Make sure that leaders are really incentivized around certain kinds of outcomes and not around activities, right? Because if they're incentivized around activities, they'll just generate activities. And the endless generation of activities is exactly what's not helping us. And then number three, and this is again where I see organizations starting to jump in constructively, but it's very early days. Change your succession processes. Pick different leaders. Choose for listening and vulnerability and insightfulness, right? These are not the things, even in 2023, that most organizations really choose their leaders for. So if you can shift on that criteria, the next generation of leaders looks a lot better than the present.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, we've talked a little bit about, my particular bugbears about the architecture of work and the way that it's been designed and who it's been designed by and for whom as well. But there's a sense too. I mean, you mentioned there are still talent shortages, and yet we also see the huge layoffs, particularly with the tech companies. Some of this stuff is like a re-landscaping or a re-architecting of the way we look at immigration, at migration, at the way we cast our talent net somehow, and it seems that there's still a lot. I mean, we touched on the DEI stuff, we talked, the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, but it seems to me again there are still these. This is very entrenched, the way we still want to recruit senior managers from certain universities and certain clubs. How do we shake that up?
Absolutely. Well, some of it is just question our fundamental assumptions, right? So we're seeing organizations get rid of the college degree requirement across all roles, right? All the way up to the CEO. And that's a game changer. It changes the diversity of the pool, right? It creates all kinds of sort of nice impacts, and nobody's shown a negative impact to it, right? It's just you can pick who you pick, but make those pools bigger. I think that piece of making the talent funnel bigger. So as another, for instance, a lot of times it would actually be easier to teach people the language of the country you're in than to take people who speak that language already and who were born there, right? And then to teach them the new skills. You've got all of these underemployed foreign-born workers. And it is encouraging. We are seeing organizations focus a lot on, should we have non-college educated folks? Should we have more foreign-born workers? Should we be hiring formerly incarcerated people? We've had a lot of legal change in the United States, and we have people who've been incarcerated for things that aren't even crimes anymore. So, opening up those new talent pools and getting the funnel bigger, I see as a really positive development.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think you're right. The point you were making earlier is that managers tend to be, partly because of the way they're developed in the early stages, very risk averse. And you can imagine the person. I mean, it's much easier to just hire from the same university that college you went to, than it is to suggest actually that somebody who's formerly been incarcerated should be brought into the workplace in case it doesn't work out for one reason or another.
Absolutely. And there's these great long-term case studies. Johns Hopkins has been for decades hiring formerly incarcerated people with no incidents, better retention levels, and, similar performance management results. So the companies that actually do it, it goes great. But to your point, there's that psychological bias.
Yeah. Listen, we're nearly out of time. We could talk about work forever because it's all, you know, it's something that's in, we all know, we all understand. But I always think that it's also something that we need. You know, it's a positive thing. It can be a positive experience. I know it's not for a lot of people, and I understand that. And I'm probably very lucky because I get to talk to people like you and play around with ideas, which is something that I'm not saying every day is great, but a lot of days are actually good. That should be the case for more people. So really, I hope you're optimistic. I think you're optimistic about that we can create better work for people. So perhaps we can just end on a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think the fact that we opened Pandora's box with the pandemic is going to turn out to be positive. I really think we're at a moment similar to the early 20th century where it feels gnarly right now, but the impacts are going to be really good.
Brilliant. Well, we are out of time. Huge thanks to Melissa and all of you for tuning in. And I'm sorry about the problems with the questions coming through. We tried to get as many as we could. We will be featuring a member of the Thinkers 50 Radar class of 2023 every week. So join us next week when we will be talking to April Wynn at the same time. Thank you again for tuning in.